Imagine waking up tomorrow, heading down to your local grocery store to buy just a simple loaf of bread.
Right, just a normal day.
Yeah, exactly. And you discover the price has jumped from like $5 to $25 just overnight.
You panic.
Right. You'd probably look around and think the entire global wheat supply had just burned to the ground.
Definitely.
But in the tech world right now, that is exactly what's happening to computer memory. And the fire driving this isn't, a natural disaster. It's an artificial intelligence gold rush that is just quietly cannibalizing the consumer hardware market.
It really is.
So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're taking a really hard look at the paradox of 2026. Because, we are supposedly living in this technological golden age, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
AI is writing complex code in seconds, autonomous models are getting wildly sophisticated, but somehow...
Somehow you can't even buy a basic stick of RAM.
Exactly. Building a PC, upgrading a laptop, or even just buying a new smartphone feels like navigating a dystopian black market right now.
It absolutely does.
We are deep in the middle of what the industry has dubbed the 2026 RAM-pocalypse. And if you tried to source any hardware recently, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
It's a completely hostile environment for the consumer right now. And it's fascinating because it forces us to look past all the marketing hype and examine the raw physical constraints of the global supply chain.
Totally. So our mission for this deep dive is to untangle this massive web for you. We've pulled together a really huge stack of sources today.
Some really great reporting in there.
Yeah, we're synthesizing tech journalism from Tom's Hardware, Windows Central, Tweaktown, and we're crossing that with hard market research data from Gartner, IDC, TrendForce, Unibetter.
Hard numbers.
The hard numbers, yeah. And maybe most importantly, we're digging into some truly harrowing horror stories from community forums like Reddit and Superuser.
Those are the ones that really keep you up at night.
Oh, for sure. We are going to answer the ultimate question here. Is this shortage actually real, or is it an artificial squeeze?
Right.
And crucially, how has this intense economic pressure birthed this incredibly sophisticated black market of counterfeit PC components? Because these fakes are currently tricking major retailers and everyday buyers alike.
Yeah, because to understand the fakes, to really grasp why a scammer is taking the time to glue physical blocks of plastic to a circuit board and laser engrave a logo onto it.
Which is insane.
It is insane. But to understand it, we first have to understand the macroeconomic reality of 2026. The scammers are just a symptom. The disease is what's happening at the foundry level.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we have to address the elephant in the room right away. Prices for RAM are up 400%.
Staggering.
If you go online right now to buy memory, the sticker shock is completely jarring. Naturally, the community is deeply suspicious. When prices quadruple in a matter of months, the immediate assumption is price gouging, right?
Of course. That's human nature.
So are the big three just squeezing the market for quarterly profits, or have we actually hit a hard physical limit in global fabrication capacity?
Well, the data tells a very stark story here. And unfortunately for all of us, it points to a physical limit.
Really? So it's not just corporate greed?
No, the price hikes are absolutely real, and they're driven by demand that is genuinely breaking the supply chain. When you look at IDC's projections, we're talking about DRAM revenue nearly tripling in 2026. Tripling, up to $418.6 billion.
Wow. That is a colossal rotation of capital.
It's unprecedented. And that's within a broader global semiconductor market that's expected to cross $1.3 trillion this year. Yeah. Gartner's numbers actually show semiconductor revenue growing 64% in 2026 alone.
64% in 1 year.
Exactly, which is the steepest growth curve we've seen in 2 decades.
And we are feeling every inch of that curve at the retail level. Let's look at the actual consumer prices. A standard 32-gigabyte DDR5 kit that you could easily pick up for about $80 in mid-2025.
Yeah, around 80, $90.
That exact same kit is now commanding anywhere from $350 to $432.
It's brutal.
And LPDDR5X, the stuff going into high-end mobile devices, that jumped 89% in just the second quarter of 2026 alone. Even DDR4, which is technically last-generation tech, is up over 50%.
Which brings us to the AI supercycle.
Yeah.
That's what's driving all of this.
Okay, break that down for us.
So the hyperscalers, we're talking Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, they're currently engaged in this massive infrastructure arms race to build out AI data centers.
Right.
And these workloads, they don't just require processing power from GPUs. They require an insatiable amount of memory.
They need it to feed the processors.
Exactly. They need HBM, which is high bandwidth memory, for the GPU accelerators.
Oh.
And they need high-capacity server-grade RDIMMs for the CPUs.
Right, and it's not just that they're buying a lot of memory, it's the physical nature of what they are actually buying.
Yes, the physical space it takes to build these things.
Because if TSMC or Samsung is dedicating their 1-alpha nodes to HBM3E for, like, NVIDIA's Hopper or Blackwell GPUs, they literally have to rip out the tooling for consumer DDR5. It's a zero-sum game on the factory floor, right?
Precisely. It is fundamentally a silicon real estate problem. You have to remember, Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron, they control over 90% of the global supply.
Just those three.
Just those three. And HBM isn't like normal RAM. It requires vertically stacking memory dies and connecting them with these complex through silicon vias or TSVs.
So they're building skyscrapers of memory instead of flat suburbs.
That is a great way to put it. And the packaging alone, like TSMC's CoWoS technology, creates immense defect rates and massive bottlenecks.
So it takes longer and it's harder to make.
Way harder. A massive amount of the silicon wafer is practically wasted, or it has to be dedicated to structural integrity compared to just stamping out standard consumer DDR5. Every single wafer allocated to an AI server is a wafer explicitly denied to consumer-grade memory.
So, to use an analogy here, it's like a billionaire renting out a massive portion of the world's farmland to grow a highly specialized, incredibly expensive truffle.
Oh, I like that.
Right, which means there's suddenly no land left to grow wheat for our daily bread, and now a loaf of bread costs $50.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that analogy perfectly captures the structural shift we're seeing. And what's crucial for you to understand as a consumer is that while we casually blame AI for this, it's not just about generative models or chatbots writing poems.
It's deeper than that.
It is a fundamental restructuring of the global supply chain. The hyperscalers are signing long-term agreements, or LTAs, locking up the supply years in advance.
So they're buying it before it's even made.
Exactly. They are willing to pay massive premiums to secure their supply lines because the alternative is losing the AI race entirely.
Which means the everyday consumer is just left fighting for scraps at the spot market level.
Exactly. And because it takes years, I mean upwards of $10 to $20 billion to bring a new semiconductor fab online, we are stuck with the capacity we have right now.
Wow.
TrendForce and other analysts are signaling that we shouldn't expect any meaningful relief in consumer pricing until late 2027 or 2028, when the next generation of fabs finally spins up.
That is a tough pill to swallow. And that exact same margin pressure in the data center space is bleeding over into literally everything else.
It's everywhere.
Because if you aren't building a custom gaming PC, you might be sitting there thinking this rampocalypse doesn't affect you.
You'd be wrong.
Very wrong. The reality is, industries that have absolutely nothing to do with AI are getting crushed by this, like smartphones. Memory used to account for maybe 10 to 15% of the bill of materials, the BOM for a smartphone.
Right, a fairly small slice of the pie.
But because of this massive price spike, memory is now eating up 30 to 40% of the cost to build a phone.
Which completely destroys the profit margins for mobile manufacturers, especially in the mid-range Android market. They simply can't absorb a component cost that has suddenly tripled.
So what do? Pass it on to the buyer?
They have to make incredibly tough choices. We are seeing major smartphone brands actually reverse a decade of hardware progression. They are actively downgrading the memory specifications in their 2026 models just to keep retail prices somewhat competitive.
So you're buying a newer phone that's technically worse than the one from 2 years ago.
In terms of memory, yes.
That is wild. And we're seeing the exact same dynamic killing the entry-level PC market, too. OEMs like Lenovo, Dell, and HP are warning of 15 to 20% retail price hikes across the board.
The math just doesn't work for a sub-$500 laptop anymore.
Right. If 40% of your manufacturing budget is going exclusively to RAM and storage, you literally cannot afford the screen, the battery, or the chassis.
Analysts are forecasting the complete disappearance of the budget laptop tier by 2028. It's just going to vanish.
And then there's the automotive industry, which I think is fascinating.
Oh, this one is catching a lot of analysts off guard because cars are no longer just mechanical machines, right?
Yeah.
They are software-defined vehicles.
Right. They're essentially giant computers on wheels now.
Exactly. Next-generation autonomous vehicles, specifically those targeting level 4 autonomy, are predicted by Micron to require a staggering 300 gigabytes of RAM.
300 gigs. in a car.
In a single car.
That sounds insane, but I guess it makes sense when you factor in the real-time processing of everything. You've got LiDAR, radar, high-resolution camera feeds all running at once.
Exactly.
Plus the localized AI models running the telemetry. But that puts the automotive industry in direct competition with hyperscalers for silicon.
It does, but in a very specific, highly problematic way. We hit what analysts call the legacy trap.
Okay, what is the legacy trap?
So industries like automotive, industrial automation, the IoT sector, they rely heavily on older memory standards, DDR4 and DDR3.
Because they don't need the crazy speeds of DDR5.
Right. They don't need bleeding edge speed. They need components that are proven, thermally stable, and traditionally very cheap.
But those legacy nodes are physically gone now, right?
Yes. Manufacturers like Samsung and SK Hynix have been aggressively tearing down their DDR4 production lines just to free up physical floor space for HBM packaging.
So now you have this massive structural shortage of older technology. The supply of DDR4 has plummeted, but the demand from the car companies hasn't changed at all.
That's exactly why we saw DDR4 prices appreciate faster than DDR5 in spot markets earlier this year.
Wait, really?
Yeah, up 172% in some cases. The automotive sector is basically in a massive bidding war over a shrinking pile of older chips.
Which leads to the absolute absurdity we're seeing right now, where standard DDR4 32GB kits are selling for nearly $300 online.
It makes no sense unless you look at the supply chain.
It's a perfect storm of supply and demand just crushing the consumer. And this is where the conversation takes a very dark turn for this deep dive.
This is the scary part.
Because when a single component costs as much as a car payment, you create the absolute perfect breeding ground for scammers. This is where the macroeconomic crisis spawns a literal black market.
Desperation breeds deception. It always does. When consumers are priced out of legitimate retail channels, they turn to secondary markets. eBay, Facebook Marketplace, Yahoo Auctions, OLX in Ukraine.
Anywhere they can find a deal.
And right now, those platforms are completely flooded with counterfeit RAM.
And we're not just talking about someone lying on a spec sheet, right? We're talking about physical forgery that is deeply, deeply sophisticated.
Oh, it's wild.
Let me bring up this story from our sources. There's this terrifying story from a Japanese user on X. Their handle is at TechiePC1115.
I saw this one.
They bought what appeared to be a standard, legitimate SK Hynix SODIMM kit for a laptop. And the labels looked completely right, the packaging looked right, but when they took a closer look and actually dissected the module, they discovered the memory chips weren't silicon at all.
No silicon anywhere.
There were literal blocks of plastic and fiberglass glued to a circuit board.
What's fascinating here is the economics of the scam itself. You might think, why go through the effort? But developing and printing a blank PCB is incredibly cheap.
Just a few cents, probably.
Exactly. Producing fake plastic blocks that have the exact dimensions of a memory die, and then laser engraving a Samsung or SK Hynix logo onto them, that costs pennies at scale.
Wait, but how does this even fool anyone for more than the 5 minutes it takes to install it? Because if the chips are literally plastic, the computer won't even post. It won't boot at all.
It won't. It's a dead piece of plastic.
So doesn't the buyer immediately just demand a chargeback? How do the scammers keep their money?
They rely on a very specific loophole in peer-to-peer marketplaces. It's the as-is or untested listing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Scammers list this fake RAM as, quote, untested, freshly pulled from an office PC, absolutely no returns accepted.
So they set the trap.
And they price it just low enough to trigger a buyer's fear of missing out on a rare deal during a massive shortage.
People are desperate.
When the RAM inevitably fails to boot, the scammer points right back to the untested man-no returns policy. The platform often sides with the seller in these peer-to-peer disputes, and the buyer has virtually no protection.
That is so malicious.
And that's just for SODIMM laptop memory, where you can actually physically see the chips on the board. If it's desktop memory, it's even worse. The chips are completely hidden under a stylized metal heat spreader.
Right, those big flashy metal casings.
You wouldn't even know it's plastic unless you physically pried the metal casing apart, which most users will never do because it instantly voids any perceived warranty.
So they are actively weaponizing the desperation of the shortage. But, peer-to-peer scams are one thing. You kind of accept a level of risk when you're buying off some guy on Facebook Marketplace.
Sure, buyer beware.
What is truly terrifying is what happens when you buy quote-unquote brand new components from a major trusted retailer. We're seeing a massive spike in return fraud penetrating the primary supply chain.
The primary supply chain is surprisingly vulnerable to this.
Mm.
Scammers will purchase an authentic high-end DDR5 kit from a major retailer like Amazon. They carefully use a heat gun to open the shrink wrap so it looks untouched. They remove the real $500 RAM and they replace it with old, completely worthless DDR4 or sometimes even DDR2 from 20 years ago.
Unbelievable.
Then they shrink wrap it back up perfectly and return it for a full refund.
And because retail warehouse workers aren't, like, trained memory technicians, they see a sealed box that weighs about the right amount, and they just throw it right back into the bin to be sold as new or open box.
Exactly. The binning and commingling of inventory at these major fulfillment centers means that a fraudulent return can very easily end up shipped out to the next legitimate customer.
There was a highly publicized case recently from our sources involving an Adata XPG caster 32-gigabyte kit. A buyer in Spain ordered it brand new.
I remember reading about that.
When it arrived, the box contained ancient DDR2 sticks, and the scammers had actually glued a metal ballast plate inside the heat spreader to fake the correct weight of the heavier DDR5 modules.
To trick the automated shipping scales.
The level of premeditation there is just insane.
It really is. Yeah. And that actually leads us to an even more insidious visual scam. It's the exploitation of LEKs, or lighting enhancement kits.
Oh man, the LEK scam. Okay, let's unpack this one because this is wild. So companies like Corsair, they sell these dummy RAM sticks for about $35.
Right.
They don't have any actual memory in them at all. They just have the RGB lighting array on top. The sole purpose of an LEK is to fill up the empty slots on your motherboard so your PC looks visually symmetrical and heavily upgraded without you having to actually buy 4 real sticks of expensive RAM.
The manufacturers design these LEKs to be visually identical to their premium memory lines when they're installed.
Right, so it matches the real sticks perfectly.
Exactly. And scammers realize this immediately. They are buying these $35 LEKs, repackaging them in counterfeit boxes, and selling them as $500 high-capacity DDR5 kits.
Imagine spending $500 carefully building your custom PC, trying to click the RAM into place, and realizing the alignment notch doesn't fit. You flip the stick over, and you realize you just paid premium pricing for a glowing piece of plastic.
It's heartbreaking.
But if you know what to look for, there are physical tells, right?
There are, but you have to look very closely. A legitimate DDR4 or GDR5 module has 288 copper contact pins running along the bottom edge.
Okay, 288 pins.
But because an LEK only needs enough pins to draw a tiny bit of power for the LED lights, it has far fewer contacts. If you look at the edge connector, you will see noticeable wide gaps where pins should be.
So there are just blank spaces on the gold edge.
Exactly. Furthermore, scammers often use a cheaper green PCB for these fakes, whereas premium gaming RAM almost universally uses a black PCB.
And there's the notch itself, right? Because DDR4 has an offset notch, while DDR5's notch is moved much closer to the center of the stick.
Correct. They are physically keyed differently, so you can't accidentally destroy your motherboard by plugging the wrong generation of memory into the slot.
So if the box says DDR5 but the notch is offset, you're holding a fake.
100%.
But what happens when the physical hardware does fit? What happens when the computer boots, Windows actually loads, and Task Manager tells you that you have 64 gigabytes of RAM installed, but you actually don't?
This is where we cross from physical forgery into straight-up digital deception. We're talking about firmware manipulation, specifically targeting the SPD, or serial presence detect.
Here's where it gets really interesting. How does an 8-gigabyte stick of RAM convince a computer it's actually 64 gigabytes?
It's essentially a sophisticated man-in-the-middle attack on your own motherboard.
Oh, wow.
Every memory module will have a tiny EEPROM chip on it. That's the SPD. When you boot your computer, before the operating system even loads, the BIOS pings this chip and asks, "What are you? Who made you? And how fast can you run?"
It's like a digital ID card.
Exactly. So the scammers simply reflash this EEPROM chip. They take a cheap, bottom-of-the-barrel 8-gigabyte stick and rewrite the firmware so it falsely reports itself to the BIOS as a premium 64-gigabyte kit.
And the OS just believes it. Windows doesn't actually physically ping all 64 gigabytes of memory banks on startup?
No, it doesn't. It just reads the manifest provided by the SPD and says, "Great, 64 gigs available. Let's go."
That is terrifying.
And this scam is incredibly insidious because for light daily tasks, it is completely invisible to the user.
What do you mean?
Well, if you are just browsing the web, checking email, or idling on the desktop, your system might only be actively using 4 or 5 gigabytes of RAM. The physical 8 gigabyte capacity hasn't been exceeded yet, so the system runs perfectly fine.
Wow. So the buyer leaves a 5-star review, thinking they got a great deal.
Exactly. They have no idea.
It's like a bank telling you that you have $1 million in your account.
Right.
The ATM screen says you have $1 million, the mobile app says you have $1 million, you feel rich, but the exact moment you try to withdraw more than $10, the bank immediately bursts into flames.
That is exactly what happens at the system level. The moment the user launches a heavy game, a video rendering application, or a local AI workload that pushes the memory usage past that true 8 gigabyte physical limit, the operating system blindly attempts to write data to memory addresses that physically do not exist on the board.
And what's the fallout of that? I'd imagine it's bad.
Best case scenario, the application immediately crashes to the desktop.
And the worst case?
Worst case, and honestly the far more common scenario, the system overwrites critical existing data in the RAM, silently corrupts your system files, or throws a fatal exception resulting in a continuous blue screen loop.
So it bricks your Windows install.
Pretty much. And by the time the user realizes the RAM is the actual culprit and that it's fake, the return window has closed and the seller's account on eBay or Amazon has been deleted.
That is so frustrating.
And we should definitely note this specific firmware hack is also rampant in the flash storage market right now.
Oh, like USB drives.
USB drives, SD cards, and even those cheap Android car stereos that claim to have 8 gigabytes of RAM but only physically have 1 gigabyte soldered to the board, it's the exact same exploit.
So if prices are astronomical and the supply chain is deeply compromised from Facebook Marketplace all the way up to Amazon warehouses, how do you protect yourself? We really need a survival guide for navigating this market.
You do. And the first rule is establishing a hard price floor in your mind. You have to understand B costs, the bill of materials.
Okay, explain that.
If the raw silicon components cost the manufacturer $280 to produce, and someone online is selling a brand new 32 gigabyte DDR5 kit for $150, it is 100% a scam.
No exceptions.
No exceptions. There are no secret warehouses of cheap memory right now. If a price seems too good to be true in the middle of a global shortage, it is fake. Full stop.
Okay, so rule 1. Price check. Rule 2 has to be a rigorous visual inspection before you ever put it near a motherboard. Like you said earlier, look at the pins. You want to see 288 continuous, unbroken copper contacts. Check the PCB color. If you're buying premium gaming RAM and the board is green, that's a massive red flag.
Definitely. And look for authentic manufacturer security features. Kingston, for example, uses a phantom color shift label on their products.
How does that work?
It can't just be a flat printed sticker. It has to physically sparkle and shift colors when you move it under a light source. Scammers rarely replicate that perfectly.
Good to know. Okay, rule 3.
Rule 3 is perhaps the most critical for dealing with retail return fraud. You must film the unboxing.
Yes, film everything. If you are buying high-value tech components in 2026, set up your phone and record yourself cutting the tape, opening the box, and inspecting the modules.
It's annoying, but it's necessary.
Because if you receive a box of DDR2 metal weights from a major retailer and you try to initiate a chargeback, the retailer's first defense will be to accuse you of swapping the RAM.
Exactly. They will assume you are the scammer.
Right. An unedited video from sealed box to physical inspection is your only bulletproof defense against a denied claim.
Totally agree. And finally, Rule 4, software verification. You cannot trust Task Manager or your System Information Panel. They will lie to you.
Because of the hacked SPD chip?
Right. You need to boot directly into the BIOS and check the JG-Desk standard timings against the manufacturer's spec sheet. And once you boot into the OS, you need to use diagnostic tools immediately.
Which ones do you recommend?
Run memtest86 for RAM. It will aggressively write to and read from every single megabyte of your memory. If there is phantom capacity, memtest86 will trigger a failure instantly.
And what about for USBs and SD cards?
For those, run ValiDrive, Fake Flash Test, or H2TestW. These tools expose firmware spoofs by proving whether the physical blocks actually hold data.
Honestly, given the sheer hostility of the market right now, waiting for the market to cool down might be the most strategic upgrade path, unless your system is literally on fire and you absolutely have to buy.
Which brings us back to where we started, really. The AI-driven supply crunch is very real. It has fundamentally rewired the economics of silicon fabrication, tripling RAM revenues for the big three, while entirely squeezing the consumer out of the priority queue.
And that vacuum has spawned this vicious secondary market filled with plastic chips, repackaged dummy kits, and firmware-hacked phantom drives.
This raises an important question, something we haven't touched on yet, but it feels like the inevitable conclusion to all of this.
Oh, what's that?
Well, if local hardware is becoming prohibitively expensive to manufacture and simultaneously dangerous to buy because the supply chain is so easily compromised,
Hmm.
are we actively accelerating toward a future of dumb terminals?
Wait, dumb terminals, like going back to the mainframe days.
It's a highly probable outcome. If the risk and the cost of upgrading a physical PC continue to outpace the average consumer's budget, we may see a massive shift where everyday users abandon local processing entirely.
So you wouldn't even own a computer, really.
Right, you just buy a cheap, low-spec monitor and keyboard setup, and you pay a monthly subscription to stream a high-end cloud computer from the exact hyperscalers who are currently hoarding all the RAM.
Oh, wow. So they create the shortage and then sell you the solution as a subscription.
Exactly. If hardware can't be trusted and it can't be afforded, the cloud becomes our only viable option.
A completely centralized technological future driven by a shortage of microscopic silicon real estate. It's wild to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Stay vigilant out there. Always check your pins, verify your firmware, and keep learning. We'll catch you on the next one.